So, where are we at with regard to the diplomatic efforts surrounding the war in Ukraine? We had the meeting in Anchorage between Trump and Putin, and 3 days later, the meeting in Washington with Trump, Zelensky, and European leaders. Those clarified some things, but really gave no closure. In Alaska, Putin rebuffed a ceasefire and held firm to his maximalist demands. That is, keeping the Donbass and Crimea, no NATO membership for Ukraine, and Ukraine basically as a puppet state to Russia. At the White House, Zelensky rejected territorial concessions, and Trump backed direct talks between Zelensky and Putin, but the core disputes all remain. Those are territory, enforcement of borders and ceasefires, as well as the money issue where Ukraine rightfully insists that Russia must pay to rebuild what they have destroyed. Now, the White House says a three-leader summit with Trump, Putin, and Zelensky is being arranged, possibly in Budapest or Geneva. Switzerland has floated legal immunity for Putin because they are a signatory of the International Criminal Court, but it's highly doubtful that Putin risks it with the warrant hanging over his head. Putin did suggest Moscow, which is an absurd idea given Russia's repeated assassination attempts against senior Ukrainian officials, including Zelensky himself. Now, the security guarantees sit at the center of the negotiation. Europe is channeling cash through NATO's procurement system so Ukraine can place multi-year orders for U.S. weapons such as air defenses, drones, military surveillance, etc. Trump likes the idea of these paid orders, and Ukraine is enjoying the stability. Roughly $1 billion in future procurement contracts are in motion right now, as well as $500 million in U.S. equipment is already inbound to Ukraine based on contracts that were already signed. Now, talks are also exploring future force postures by NATO to make any ceasefire enforceable. Europe would likely shoulder the bulk of the burden, but Trump has said the U.S. could support with air assets or naval assets as well as intelligence backing, but no troops on ground. NATO defense ministers have already begun sketching an enforcement package with an emphasis on layered defense, long-range fires, and logistics. The thinking is simple. The fastest way to stabilize a ceasefire is to make Ukraine overwhelmingly able to deter another Russian assault. Then Russia reminded everyone what's at stake here. Overnight, it launched one of the largest strikes of the war with over 570 drones and 40 missiles. Two of those missiles hit an American-owned electronics plant in western Ukraine near the Hungarian border. The factory is run by Flex, a Texas-based firm with 100 sites worldwide and employed 600 people, making civilian goods like coffee machines. The sirens sent most to shelters, but at least 15 were hurt, and a third of the plant burned to the ground. Officials stressed it never produced military equipment. Zelensky highlighted the fact that it's again another attack by Russia on ordinary civilians and an American enterprise and investment. U.S. business leaders in Ukraine said it shows Russia is deliberately humiliating U.S. companies, all while Russia offered no explanation. Regardless, this is quite the slap in the face for Donald Trump because he just met with Putin mere days ago as well as European leaders. Putin is ordering strikes on American business with no military ties to Ukraine. I reiterate that, once again, there's no reason that Donald Trump is giving Putin as much grace as he is, and it is flat out embarrassing that Trump is allowing attacks on American investment in Ukraine to happen. Russia, meanwhile, keeps repeating that a NATO troop presence in Ukraine is a non-starter and is blaming Ukraine as the sole obstacle to peace. Well, that's flat out false once again. Besides, Ukrainian law doesn't allow territorial concessions without a referendum, which would be overwhelmingly rejected, and their constitutional wartime rules bar such a vote anyway. Even if it were legal, handing over the Donbass and Crimea would give Russia key terrain and another launch pad for future wars. A ceasefire without monitoring, accountability, and deterrence would just invite Russia to reload and strike again sometime in the near future. However, Europe is responding by tightening the economic noose. In its 18th sanctions package, they've lowered the crude oil price cap from $60 a barrel to $47.60, with dynamic adjustments to keep Russian sales below market value. Now, the European Union is targeting Russia's shadow fleet as well and has tightened export controls through its insurance, a domain that is actually dominated by the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is also moving against cryptocurrency-based payment systems, helping Russia sell oil and cracking down on Kyrgyz-flagged ships moving Russian crude. Western countries are intercepting payments directly, forcing Russian enablers to choose between Moscow and solvency, whether they can continue to support the Kremlin and their efforts or get paid, basically. In addition, if these talks stall, Washington seems to be preparing secondary measures such as tariffs as high as 500% to hit intermediary countries like China and India that enable Russia. But it remains to be seen if Trump will actually do anything to punish Russia, as he has not so far this year, despite repeated slaps in the face by the Kremlin. And it is because Putin believes he has leverage over Trump that he continues this war, whether it's through personal ties or Trump's reluctance to escalate. Putin seems convinced Trump's pressure is not serious, and And why would he think it's serious? Nothing has happened thus far. Putin has broken through several of Trump's deadlines. Europe, for its part, is finally mobilizing its full economic power, but the question is whether it is too little, too late. But the clock seems to be ticking for Russia. Trump has given Putin and Zelensky a 2-week timeline for follow-on talks, something that Zelensky has signaled he would do, something that Putin said he would not because he doesn't see Zelensky as legitimate. And additionally, with Russia hammering Ukraine overnight, striking a US-owned factory and killing civilians, the gap between diplomacy and battlefield reality is widening. We just have to see if Trump is finally catching on that Putin is the bad guy, because every time it seems that Trump meets with him, he comes away with this rosy picture, and it's like he doesn't realize Putin lies about who he really is. It's very weird that Trump is the only person in the Western world that sees Putin as a good guy. Either way, there's more to follow here, so we'll have to see where all of this goes, and likely as we get closer to that 2-week timeline, more information will come out on what the response from the United States, the West, and Ukraine will be.